I'm just going to answer this based on my experience with ACERN for the last couple of years, for the last 3 years, I think. Well, the most pressing urban challenges that we saw is the development planning, because I think if you wanted to tackle the vulnerabilities for the whole cities, because our project is for the whole cities, then I think development planning is one of the core. If you don't have the planning right for development, everything will go really wrong. For example, infrastructure, that is part of the development planning. So infrastructure is one of the most vulnerable sectors within that development and within the city systems. Once, like for example, if there's a flood, and then it will, the thing that will be affected firstly is infrastructures, and that's part of development planning. And then development planning is across sectoral sectors, because when you talk about development, it talks about other systems as well. And then I think the most pressure that we are identified in Eastern cities is development. And then I think the differences between large, medium, and small scale cities is been discussed within this conferences, that the larger it is, the more complex the vulnerabilities, because there's more challenges. For example, more people involved, more stakeholders involved. And then, for example, when you talk about large cities like Jakarta, I mean, it's so complex. Like, you talk about dwellers, you talk about slum areas, but you talk about the rich people as well. While when you talk about small cities, like, the vulnerability may be not that much, maybe just like one particular stakeholders, because like this, maybe the private sectors that are available there, only one, while in cities like Jakarta, there's 100 of it. So I think that's the major differences about vulnerabilities in this scale of cities. This is, it's always been identified that the poor and vulnerable the poor people are the most vulnerable. It's always like, from our perspective and from our program, we always we discuss this in the very beginning of one project, or in every starting initial development plannings or discussion with the government. Like, when you want to talk about development, forget about other things, but you need to identify the most vulnerable group first. And so we identified this as an opportunity for us to work better. For example, these can be an indicator if our project will be successful or not. So if we could help these poor and vulnerable people by implementing a really good intervention projects, for example, flood early warning system, once the flood comes and these people are able to cope, then that's an indicator of our success. So I don't know whether it's that actually answering the questions, but what I'm trying to say here is that we need to identify these people with a lack of limited capacity in financial, identified in the beginning, and then put them as part of the design or the planning. And then, so whatever we do in the future, we already considered them within that planning, within that design. So that's one of our strategies in helping these vulnerable and poor people. Well, from yesterday's discussions, also been discussed that there's a lot of challenges in bringing multi-stakeholders. I mean, they bring their own interests, their own agendas and priorities, and then usually, if we don't have a clear target of what this multi-stakeholders going to work on, it will goes everywhere. I mean, like, we planning to talk about resilience, but then you bring the private sectors, the engineers, the planners, the government, and then you come up with like these discussions about what resilience that you mean. So the challenges, like, obviously will be there, but there's a huge opportunity in bring this together. For example, in Indonesia, we have this culture of working in silos, like even from government agency to another government agency, they don't talk to each other. So there's a risk of double planning, double financing, and then it's not effective. So by bringing this by bringing these stakeholders together, we're trying to break that wall of working in silos and start coordinations between these government agencies. That's from small scale of the government. So the opportunity here is that once they talk to each other, they know more opportunities of, for example, finance. Like if the health agency have this kind of project ideas, but they don't know how to implement that because they have limited resources. Once they talk to development planning agencies, they know that, oh, actually, the national government have these funds that could go through the development planning agencies and then go to the health agencies. So they understand, like they understand more about the systems and then the opportunities that are exist. And these examples also applies for the multi-stakeholders of civil societies, academias, and government. Usually the government implement without any plannings. So once we bring the academia within that stakeholders, within that groups, they start to think about, oh right, we need to think about the future projections when we want to build drainage master plan, for example, not only considering our past experiences. And then when we bring the private sectors together, then you need to think about sustainability. How can we be independent without hoping too much on donors' money or like the national governments, but how can we have one project that could be self-sustained by having, you know, that way of business thinking. And then you see this, I think, I forgot who's mentioning this in the conferences, that's saying private sectors actually have billions of dollars available for this kind of project, like climate change project or development project, but it's never been used because I think our engagement with the private sector is not enough. And so once we're able to do this, the more opportunities of fundings, of ideas, of being innovative, being sustained is more open. And then this also applies for access of informations. Like if I'm on my own, I don't have any social connections with other people. Maybe I don't have information like I do right now, or so I have more, you know, when we try to come up with the solutions, it will be better with more minds because you have different perspective and different ways of angles in solving it instead of just one person. I think, yeah, and then and I think it's also good when you plan something because you see it, you then consider the different scenarios. So I think that's even though we have like difficulties and challenges, the opportunities is really big on that.